All right, so far we're talking about the five forces that influence how the ROI in an industry is split up. So far we've talked about substitutes, we've talked about the threat of new entrants, we've talked about buyer power and supplier power. The last thing we'll talk about is intensity of competition between sellers. So this point. So again, when you hear people talk about capitalism, they're like, "Oh, competition's great," and you hear business leaders talk about, "Oh, we want competitive free markets, like let competition decide," and yet intensity of competition in an industry undermines return on investment in that industry, and what Porter lays out is like, actually, we don't. If you're a seller, you don't really want a competitive industry. Let's see. Okay, so this is again a Porter quote. I'll give you a second to read it. And I just want you to pay special attention to that very last line. Thus, firms are mutually dependent. That businesses in an industry are not actually competing with each other. They are dependent upon one another to maximize the share of value that goes to them as a collective whole. And this is a Porter quote. So some forms of competition are highly unstable and quite likely leave the entire industry worse off from the standpoint of profitability. So competition, actually not that good. If there are a few firms of equal size and power, it creates instability because they're prone to fight each other and have the resources for sustained and vigorous retaliation. So one of the worst situations is when you have two really powerful sellers in an industry. They're of equal power and they're fighting against each other. And because they're so powerful, they're really hurting each other. An example of this, kind of the most striking example of this right now, is Uber and Lyft. It's an industry where there's basically two main sellers in that entire industry, right? And they're both incredibly powerful. They both have really big war chests, and they're both operating at a loss right now, right? They're both selling their service for less than it costs to provide. And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to undercut each other. They're trying to undercut each other. And so because you have these two powerful businesses, these two powerful sellers that are competing against each other, it's really undermining industry profitability. And again, that's really great for the consumer though, for the buyer though. Like it costs like, man, sometimes I pay like $4 to go like 10 miles on an Uber or a Lyft, right? And so it's bad for Uber and Lyft, but it's good for the buyers. And of course, Porter doesn't like that. Uh, Another bad situation for sellers is when there's a lot of different sellers of equal power, and Porter uses these terms mavericks. That, oh man, how these businesses try and go and make money over the other businesses, right? When really they're mutually dependent. They should be playing nice together. So an example of this is like the restaurant industry. I I have a thing with the restaurant industry. It seems like the worst business to ever get into. I have no idea why anyone would ever want to own a restaurant. But like in downtown San Rafael, you have dozens of restaurants that you can go to, and they're all competing for your business, right? And so you've got places like Indian Cha. There's the place on 4th Street that gives away free meals on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And it's like, if you're a competitor, what are you supposed to do, right? Like you can't offer your product for less than free. You can't start like paying people to come with your product. So that would be a maverick, right? They're ruining industry profitability for everyone. Okay, so this is what Porter wants. He wants a highly concentrated industry where there's only a few sellers and they're all powerful, but it's clear which one is the most powerful. And he says specifically, leaders can impose discipline as well as play a coordinative role in the industry. So again, we see that labor getting together and organizing and unionizing to increase their power, that's bad. We don't want that. But when businesses come together and collaborate, coordinate, it can be really good for industry profitability, which is what Porter wants. An example of this is the internet service provider industry. So there's only a few players. This is actually not true nationally, but I think at least locally in the Bay Area, Comcast seems to be the most powerful, and then Verizon, and then kind of AT&T at the end. And they're all charging a ridiculous amount for internet service. They're not like America has like the 37th slowest internet in the world, right? So they're not delivering value. They're not delivering quality. And they're charging exorbitant rates for it. And the reason they can do it is because they have this coordinative role. They have this discipline in the industry where they're all kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. We're all going to charge way too much for our internet service and not provide very high quality. When you have diverse sellers are also bad because they don't understand, they might have different strategic objectives and they don't really understand the cues from the other sellers in the industry. So you also don't want diverse sellers. You want homogenous sellers within an industry. And again, you can see Porter's language here, agreeing on a set of rules for the game, for the industry. All right, so that is Michael Porter's five forces model, and essentially it's the idea that there are five major forces in an industry. Remember, we're not doing a business analysis, we're doing an industry analysis, and there are five forces within industries that influence how return on investment is split up amongst the key players. Economists, when they want a perfectly competitive industry, they want weak sellers, lots of sellers competing against each other, more powerful suppliers that pose a meaningful threat of forward integration, and then really concentrated and powerful buyers that can bargain for more value. Really easy for buyers to leave the industry and go to substitute, so there's low switching costs, and low entry barriers. So new entrants can always come in, entrepreneurs can always come in and challenge existing sellers within an industry. What Porter described as sellers is wanting is this, where you have a few very powerful sellers, but clear power hierarchy amongst the sellers so that they can coordinate together. One can institute discipline in the field. You have weak, lots of suppliers that are weak, lots of buyers that are weak. There are high entry barriers, so entrepreneurs cannot come in and challenge existing sellers. There's high switching costs, so buyers cannot change to substitutes. And it's difficult for suppliers to forward integrate to buyers.